Good evening. This is a joint special meeting of the Hollister City Council and Hollister Planning Commission on February 12th, 2024. Meeting is now called to order. It is 6:31 p.m. City Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Blanc,
Present.
Commissioner Lenore,
Present.
Chair Henderson,
Present.
Councilmember Perez,
Present.
Councilmember Resendez,
Here.
Councilmember Morales, Councilmember Burns,
Here.
and Mayor Casey.
Here.
Commissioners Ross and Corona are not present. Thank you. I'd also like to report that the agenda for the joint special meeting of the City Council of the City of Hollister and Hollister Planning Commission of February 12th, 2024 was posted on the bulletin board at City Hall on February 16th, February 9th, 2024 at 4:18 p.m. for Government Code 5495442. Thank you.
Oh, Councilmember Resendez, could you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Ready? Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, before we begin, I need to address the manner and decorum of our meetings and issue a warning in this regard. Meetings must be in an orderly and efficient manner without willful disruption so that the business of the city can be conducted. While City Council is more than willing to listen to comments from the public, it must be done at the appropriate time and should be done at the podium with the microphone so that we can record your words properly at the meeting. There cannot be interruptions when council members are speaking or audience members calling names, chanting, or yelling out. If you do so, a warning will be issued to you, and if the behavior continues, you may be asked to leave chambers. If there's too much disruption from members of the audience, depending on severity, it may be necessary to call a recess, clear the chambers, or maybe cancel the meeting. I would like to ask for your courtesy and cooperation in this regard so that it won't be necessary to take any of these steps. Thank you. So our study session, item 1, 2023-2031 housing element update joint study session of the City Council and Planning Commission. Can we get a staff report?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, City Council and Planning Commission. Thank you all for being here tonight at the study session. The purpose of tonight's study session is to go over the draft housing element, which was released for public review, the public draft. And tonight we're hoping to get questions, comments, concerns, feedback from both the commission and the council to provide direction to staff and our consultant team, Kimberly Horn, who's here tonight to give a more detailed presentation on the item. But to get feedback on the draft so that as the public comment period ends, we continue to get comments from the public. We also have comments from the council. We can make any revised changes that we need to and submit the first draft to the state for their review. With that, I'd like to introduce Bryant De La Torre from Kimberly Horn, who will be presenting on the 6th cycle housing element update.
We can bring forward the presentation. Council, commissioners. My name is Brian De La Torre from Kimberly Horn. Here also with Dave Barquist behind me. We've been working with staff to get this public draft out, and this was published 2 weeks ago. It's been in public review for 2 weeks now, an additional 2 weeks. Comments have been rolling in. Again, comments can be submitted at any time, but this is the statutory limit is 30 days for a public review draft. So it's currently in that sense. A lot of this will be repetitive. I know back here 2 months ago, you heard some of this, but just for stakeholders, anyone online who hasn't heard it, we want to reiterate that. So we'll start off with an overview of the housing element arena, some of the efforts we've had to date, our public review draft, the status of that, our site selection strategy, and then next steps once the public review draft period is. So first we look at like, what is a housing element? So it's one of the elements in the general plan. It's the only one that needs to be updated regularly. So it's every 8 years, you need to regularly update it, make sure that the zoning, development standards are in order so that we can accommodate housing for the future 8 years, the next 8 years. They identify housing needs, specifically for income categories. We have very low income, moderate, and above moderate income. Each category has its own allocation, which we'll get into in a second. In this plan, we accommodate our housing through various strategies. That's usually through zoning, doing general plan updates, just updates to accommodate housing. We set goals, we set objectives. We have our programs to meet those objectives. And the requirement for this housing element is certification ultimately, and it's certified by the California Community Development, Housing and Community Development Department in the state of California. So once we submit, that's who we'll be putting to. So why are these housing elements updated? Again, it's to ensure that we're compliant with state law to accommodate housing for current future residents of the city. This also demonstrates that the city can accommodate housing. We have the available space, we have the zoning development standards to allow for future housing. And again, it gets to be involved, both current, future residents, interested stakeholders together. And getting a certified housing element, again, it means full compliance with state law. And it also means that we've gone through the whole review process. There's many new state laws that have passed in about the last 5 years or so. So a lot of updates that are required to the limits of municipal code to be compliant with a lot of that state law. And the benefits of certification, state grants, that's a big one, funding sources for housing and various other programs and infrastructure as well. So again, it says it protects cities from penalties. So we've seen in other jurisdictions, jurisdictions that are out of compliance for a certain amount of time. HCB, the state enforcement need to come, remove local control for some processes.
Let me chime in for just a second. On the grant side, it's not just grants for the housing element per se. Any grants that come through HCB, including your CDBG grants, are required to have a certified housing element as well. So just wanted to add that.
Right. So the housing element you'll see in the document, it's structured kind of like a layered approach. So first we go through the needs and a snapshot of our demographics. So we look at ethnic and racial makeup, we look at household incomes, household size, growth projections for not only the city but the region, and then we evaluate the existing policies that we have here in the city to evaluate if we have any constraints. So we look at what we call governmental constraints. So that's the municipal code. Do we have anything that's restricting growth? Do we have development standards that don't allow us to get to the max densities, even if the densities are allowed? Sometimes the underlying development standards don't allow the max density. Then we look at non-governmental constraints. So that's market forces, something that the city doesn't have control over. And then we also look at infrastructure constraints, environmental constraints. So here in Hollister, we have environmental constraints. So we analyze that in the document and determine what can we do about these constraints and how can the city overcome these constraints. After that, we do an analysis of AFFH. So that stands for affirmatively furthering fair housing. So just analyzing any fair housing issues in the city and see if there's any way that existing policies are causing that, if it's outside forces, whatever it may be. We analyze it to determine what those fair housing issues are and how we're going to look at the city. After that, we look at the RENA, which we'll go into in a second. And we identify sites. So these are just parcels, areas that can accommodate future housing and future growth. As part of this full analysis, we look back at the bid cycle housing element to see how we did. What was our growth? Did we meet our goal? If we didn't meet our goal, how we evaluate to see how we can rectify that. So in this 6 cycle, we can meet our objectives. last year, our policy, our programs to meet. So now we go into our regional housing needs allocation. So this is our total set number goal that the city or ideally wants to meet our housing. So the first, this comes down from HCD. So at the HCD level, there's a determination for the whole state of how many units based on projected growth and also existing need. And from there, HCD sends it down to councils of governments. Here we have the San Benito Council of Government, and at the council of government level, they distribute a fair share, quote unquote, fair share of units. So for our COG, San Benito COG, the allocation is 4,163 units, which we'll see in a bit is double of our last cycle. So you'll see there's a lot of growth that is projected. This is based off of, again, existing need, future need, employment growth. There's many factors that go into this. SBCOG, they published their final remit determination. In there's a whole determination of what gets mixed into these equations to get ultimately that number of 4,163 units. So here we see the breakdown of the total 4,163 units by income category. So you'll see that 10% is for extremely low household. So that's household with the income category 0 to 30% of the area median income. And just for reference, the area median income for a household of 4 in San Diego County is approximately $140,000. Again, that's for family of 4. As the family size goes lower, you'll see kind of numbers fluctuate, but that's kind of like the standard that HCD uses is that family of 4 size. Then we move on to the very low income households. So that's household with 31% to 50% area median income. Again, it's half of the total, like very low income category. So again, 423. As we go on, you'll see the allocation gets higher and higher. So we see like a bulk of our units are in moderate income, and then the rest is right there. I know last time, Councilmember Resendiz, you asked about the what the percentage of the household population was in the low income category. So I got the calculation. It's approximately like 40% of the total population, household population, falls into either extremely low to low income category. So that's from 80% or lower of the area households. You see it's a pretty big number.
I do see that. So that's what you wrote here, but then you're saying extremely low and very low. We only allocated 10 and 10, so total 20.
No, so that breakdown would come from SBCOG, yeah. So when HCD sends their determination, it falls into 4 categories. So above moderate, low income, and very low income. But then the state law also requires to plan for extremely low income. So we just break down the very low and we cut it in half and allocate half to extremely low and half to very low. And here you'll see the comparison from the 5th to the 6th cycle. So you'll see now in the 6th cycle, it's 4,163 units. You'll see in the 5th cycle is 1,360. So that's 260% increase. That's a pretty significant jump. We see this. It's a general trend across the state. Some jurisdictions, the increases are dramatic. Some even have less, but generally we do see an increase of units from the 5th to the 6th cycle, which is based on the growth across the state. So now we go into some of the efforts, community engagement efforts we completed, just to get input from the community, from stakeholders. And you'll see in May 2023, we had our first workshop. So that was a virtual workshop via Zoom. We had two breakout sessions. So we had the main session, and then for Spanish speakers, we also had a Spanish breakout group where we had the same presentation just translated in Spanish. So that if we had any Spanish speakers who wanted input, we wanted to make it accessible for them as well. So in this presentation included, similar to what the first couple slides were, just an intro to the housing element, what it is, where our goals are, and kind of the timeline and options that the public has to engage in housing. And then, right after our first workshop, we had the community survey. So this survey was open for a couple months, and we got 57 responses. Out of these responses, they're just, there's 13 questions. But some of the main takeaways from this. Yeah, prioritization of affordable housing, and also senior housing. So, we want people to be able to age in place. And typically, senior households have fixed income, so there's a higher need for affordable options for senior households. Also, there is a priority for larger households. So typically, if you see households with either larger household groups, so 4, 5, 6 household members, having a house with lower units, we consider that house overcrowding. So having larger household types, 3 to 4 bedrooms, while also having affordable. Is some of the biggest. And so for all of these engagement efforts, there's an appendix. I believe it's appendix G that has all of the engagement efforts. So I have a summary of all the workshops, summaries of the community survey, and then we include attachments of any written comments we got. It's all laid out. Now we get to the public review draft. So on January 26th, that's when it was published, for the public to see. City staff sent out to our email list, letting people know it's available, ready for comment. If there's any comment, there's multiple ways people can submit. There's a link on the city website. There's also the housing website that was set up, and then also the mailing address if there's any physical comments that we receive. So state law requires jurisdictions to post before formally submitting to HCD. There's a 30-day review period that's mandatory. So for City of Hollister, that would end on February 29th. And that's the time where it will be, and all comments will be entered into the public record. But during those 30 days afterwards, be mandatory. That's state law. And anyone can submit comment at any time. It doesn't mean that this is important.
If I can just jump in really quick, you may notice that it's the 26th, the 29th of the 30-day period. We did have some additional time to align with our outreach to ensure that when it was published, there was a full 30 days out there for the public. So it's a little bit longer, but that gave, just in case someone didn't see it, give them a look. So we wanted to make sure it was advertised 30 for 30 days.
Mayor Casey. Question. I don't know. Well, it's about, that's exactly what it's about. I don't know what their presentation looks like, but I'm wondering if there's a place where we can just pause and take questions from everybody, move on, take questions from everybody, because everybody got a list of questions here. I think my colleagues would write this as well.
It's up to me.
So, do you want to pause in the presentation to ask questions, or do you want to do that? And move into whatever suggestions?
It's kind of, like that, so. I'd rather do mine all at once. But it's up to you guys. I'll go with whatever. I'm not sure how I'll disseminate all of these.
How much longer is the presentation if there were? Because we're to the end of it. But the problem is if you present something 10 minutes ago and 30 minutes away, it doesn't align necessarily. It doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, pretty late. I think there's about 15 months long. Not sure what number slide, but 20 slides.
So following his comment, is there places in the presentation that you feel like it's a natural time to pause, like after the arena? Is that a good time to pause?
I think after these next 2 slides, that one will go into what's in the draft itself. But this is kind of just like an overview up
Why
to.
don't we take a pause then? We'll take
Okay.
one pause and then we'll go to the draft itself, and then we'll do the rest of the questions after that at the end.
Got it. Yeah. And I also wanted to add on this slide, we didn't add it, but there is that 30-day mandatory review period, but there's also, once that's completed, there's also a 10-day, an additional 10 days that the city must consider all the comments. If the city wants to make any revisions to the document based on comments that were received, those 10 days, the city must take those 10 days to you don't necessarily have to address them, but, you know, consider them before formally submit. So technically, it would be 10 days from February 29th. That's when the city can, submit to the city. Right, so this is where to access the draft. So for anyone that's online, they can access it that way. But on the city's website, it should be on one of the first landing pages. You'll see this document. So we have it posted individual sections and appendices are listed, and then there's the whole document. And right below, there'll be a link to submit feedback. There's also the address for the city. We can get comments through mail or in person. And this is.
Can I start with that commissioners, if you have any chapters on the so far? Do you have any questions on the issues?
So we're not commenting on what you have right now, right? I have some comments based on chapter.
We're gonna go into that, right?
Yeah, the next one will go.
This is more just the basics of.
Okay, I'm good. I understand the process and
Okay.
the intent.
Only question I have is, how much participation from the public has there been the number? That's my interest.
For the community survey, it was 57. This would be for the public review draft. Since the public review draft, I'm not sure they will know how many.
We received comments so far from the public that were, I think we may have gotten maybe like 3 or 4 emails, but some of them are just like really brief questions. But I think we've gotten about 2 comments so far on the public review draft. So not too much participation in the last 2 weeks.
That's one of the ones.
Thank you, Mayor. So, following up on Councilmember Perez's comment, do we have you talked about 57 participants in the summary draft review. But you talked about people participating in the workshop. How many people actually participated in the workshop?
In the first workshop, I think we had 24 attendants, if I remember correctly. We also have a summary of that. We don't have the exact number. We may have documented it, but I think off the top of my head, I can only see 24. And then attendance at the last study session. I know there's a lot of people here, but whatever's in the public comment, but I'm not sure off the top of my head exactly.
The purpose for my question is, those numbers sound awful to me. And I don't know if it's unique to Hollister. I don't know what other jurisdictions that you guys have done the same work for, but is that to be expected that the responses from the community are going to be terrible? Because when I look at a community of 40,000 plus residents, and you're talking 50 people that are going to help to weigh in on how we help to decide the future for the next 8 years, that's a great concern for me.
Yeah, it really varies across jurisdictions. I know staff is making diligent efforts to market the events and the meetings, everything in dual and English, Spanish, on a website, mail list, in person. So it really depends from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but documents like this, so typically it's hard for the public to understand. We try to make it as clean as possible, as readable as possible, but you've seen it, it's like 300 something pages, and a lot of the time, a lot of this gets lost over people's heads, and it's tough to get people engaged, but it's we see more or less in other places, but I think this is about average, I would say, of the turnout. And we try to engage people, it's tough.
Are there other strategies we could utilize to further engage? I mean, it seems like the clock's running, and more is by far better in my opinion. And so whatever we can do as a city council, as a planning commission, as the city officer, to get more involvement, I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, there's I think in-person strategies like farmers markets or public events. Sometimes that's a good way to get people engaged. Sometimes if we promote stuff online, sometimes it's not as accessible. But it's difficult. And sometimes people also just like forget or don't want to engage, so we try to take different strategies, but there's definitely.
I'm not trying to put you on. the
No, no,
spot. I mean, we're on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
I do have a few other questions. If they're going to be answered later, please feel free to say so and just defer. So, you talked about 4,163 units that were expected to build in the next 8 years, from the region numbers, right?
Correct.
And so that's over an 8-year period, and if my simple math is 520 units a year, we would hit that number. But, what's the consequence if we don't hit that number 8 years from now in 2031?
Yeah, so in the last cycles, not to say there hasn't been any consequences. Dave's been around longer than I have. You may know what those consequences were back then, but now, into the programs, into the commitments that jurisdictions make. Typically, there's like monitoring programs, so you self-monitor, and then every year staff always sends a annual progress report. Typically, in the programs now, jurisdictions are being asked, if you don't meet, 25% of your RENA by, for example, 5 years into the planning period, you need to either identify additional sites or rezone different sites. It's really different depending on the situation, but typically we've seen HCD be a little more strict on the front end, opposed to just letting jurisdictions, accommodate their housing and not really, or not accommodate the housing.
Okay, all right, and so how did we do in the fifth cycle on our numbers?
I don't remember what it was, but we didn't need it. We didn't need it. I think,
Short 1,800 units.
yeah, I think for above moderate, we made it, but for the lower income categories, yeah.
Okay, so then really our past history is not that we made the lower one.
Correct.
And so we really need to focus on a strategy to hit that number or exceed that number. And so, you mentioned briefly that Hollister, maybe San Benito County have some environmental constraints. What are those environmental constraints that we have to contend with?
Yeah, so high fire severity zones, that's a big one, flood zones and fault zones. And then infrastructure is not so big anymore. I think outside of the city limits it is, but yeah, those are the three big ones. So fire, earthquake, and flood.
And so this graph that we're going to hear more about, or the rest of those concerns that we can report with.
Yeah, so we avoided accommodating any sites in any of those flood zones, environmental hazard zones, fire hazard zones, sorry, and flood zones. We avoided those.
No concerns about earthquake zones?
Yes, that's a big issue in Hollister, as you all know. It's always a hazard. I think the state building code acts to address that. But specifically in our document, we avoided the fault zones.
Okay, there's two more I think that now will be done for the moment. I heard you and then I heard our city manager talk about their consequences of not finalizing a draft. So was this say why was this not due by the end of the 2023?
Yes, the statutory deadline was December 15th, 2023. There's a 120-day critical grace period to get into that. So any time past that, the city would be at compliance.
Okay, and I heard conversations specifically about the lack of maybe getting grants. And so, do we know, city manager, and if you don't understand as well, if we were not to pass some updated version of the housing element, and we were going to lose the grants, we have a sense for how many grants dollar-wise we currently have that would be in jeopardy.
So right now, our CDBG grant has expired. That was the one we mentioned a few meetings back. We're applying later in the year. So if it wasn't at that time, we usually see, and that's competitive. So the last time was 250,000. We did try for 500,000 the time before, and then any various smaller grants that you may receive from HCD. So nothing will be in jeopardy today, but it would be future applications. So roughly we apply anywhere depending on the $500,000.
Okay, thank you. I think that completes my questions for now, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Resendez.
Thank you, and my colleagues answered, or they asked some of the same questions I had, so thank you for that. I was gonna ask about environmental constraints. I was going to, one thing that you said is that we're seeing a dramatic shift throughout the state of this similar trends, this particular with low and very low. What are other cities doing to meet that?
Your secret strategies, typically this is addressed through zoning, so increasing density. The higher density you have of the housing product, typically there's affordability just like by design, so the more units you have, typically would be a little lower income. There's like inclusionary housing ordinances, there's incentives, developers taking advantage of the state density bonus. There's a couple different strategies, and it really depends on the jurisdiction.
Okay, I remember we talked about increasing the density. I don't know, Ms. Kelly, is that still on there? Hasn't changed? I know the status of the other things, so thank you for that. I'm just looking over my notes here. So one thing that Councilor Burns asked for the attendees in May, none of them were Spanish speaking either, right? I just want to,
I don't remember.
I remember that there was none, because we had a translation service there, but it was utilized in May.
Yeah, I was gonna say if we had anyone, it might have been one, but I don't think there was anyone at the virtual.
So same concerns, and it's not your fault, it's not the community's fault, it's not, well, I would very much be interested in finding out what we can do to engage the public even more. Just from talking to them, it seems like this is their biggest, one of the biggest challenges that we face here. So it's surprising that we don't have more engagement, and I think we can do better. And some of the suggestions we made, we could follow on that. But also, we're elected to represent them too, so I get it, because we should know what decisions we should be making based on having those conversations with them. But it would be nice to see them more actively engaged. I was going to ask about any more comments. I'm surprised I only got 2 comments from this last couple of weeks. So I think we could do a better job there. And consequences. I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then an update is that we should refresh us. So the 57 responses, that was for the online community survey, but we also got 64 in person. So we have kids in the park event. Yeah, we got to feedback that way. So that's also again attached as responses in Thanks.
So that sounds like a good strategy, I guess is what I'm getting at. These are these public events, we can get more outreach.
So I just had a couple more, maybe are along the same lines, about the community engagement piece. So we did the community workshop May, last May. We did our joint session, in December. I'm looking through the list here, and it talks about a community workshop too. And
Yes.
exactly happened.
In 2 weeks. So on the 18th, yes, or sorry, 28th, yeah, 28th. Here, I believe. Yeah, at 6:30.
One day before it's due?
Yes, so like we mentioned, that's not the last day that we're accepting comments.
Okay.
It's just statutory deadline or statutory period. And then again, after those 30 days, so after the 29th, the city has 10 days to incorporate. Yeah, to make any adjustments if
Cutting it close.
Okay, so on that, this is not gonna be a Zoom workshop, like we are gonna do an actual in-person workshop. Like that's all or something, we're here, okay, good. And then just suggestion wise, I mean, I know it's expensive to do the kind of things or a postcard or something, but we aren't reaching a large portion of the people that are those that are on social media and online, but we're not reaching the rest of them. So I don't know if that's something we have any kind of budget for.
One thing we can look at.
It's gonna be better.
Yeah, one thing we can look at, now, this will impact timing,
Yeah, it's not.
is putting something in utility bill. The other piece we have to do is we have to coordinate with Senate Local Water as well, because not every Hollister resident is a city of Hollister water, that, so there's the division.
This is in
in town.
2 weeks, then it's really possible to try to do that. And then my other question is that, it mentions focus groups here. How many focus groups have we done? This big focus.
I'm not sure No, we haven't, I mean, we're trying to formulate what the exact focus group, so typically this would be, community, like specific here in Hollister, like, you know, farm worker groups, housing advocates, housing developers, those types of.
When you do this, I mean, are we like, it's a good idea about how.
Yeah, we need to strategize.
I guess it does in there, because I just, as much engagement as we can get, as much feedback as we can get. And it was really important. And another question for you about the survey, I noticed that you have folks, from out of the county doing the survey, why would we include that? If they don't live here?
It's just open, so, whenever we have these plans, we're planning for Hollister, but we also understand that it's the region as a whole, so we can't restrict, who can, you know, provide feedback, it has to be open to the.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with Hollister, I don't have a problem with San Diego County, everybody's. But it seems like there were out of county folks like throwing in comments and such, and so it just seemed a little odd to me. I think that's it. A question or a comment?
Oh, a question.
Okay,
Did the planning staff, we used to do block ads as big as a quarter page to catch the attention in the freelance, to catch the attention. Now, there's more social, you know, it's more online now, but you still have a great readership of the freelance. That goes to a lot of senior citizens because they're not online. They're reading that freelance. And we used to put a nice ad in there for housing element, general plan meetings, you know, growth management meetings, important things. We would make a bigger ad. I don't know if you've done any of that, but it's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Mayor Casey.
hold on just a minute, did you have any question?
Yeah, just a quick question. So this sixth cycle covers years 2023 through 2031. And this is gonna be part of the general plan, correct?
Correct, yeah,
Okay. So the general plan goes clear till 2040. So what happens after 2031?
we'll have to update it again. Every cycle, yeah, and it'll just be an amendment to the general.
So if I could just hop in on there, it's what we have, Chair Henderson, is with the general plan being every 20 years and this being every 8, you have just the happenstance of them kind of aligning at the same time, which tip of the hat to the planning staff for juggling both. That's often not the case, whereas it'll be in an off cycle and the housing element will be separate, just at the timing of all those developments.
I just remember what my question was, so. You said that our, we have 100, is it 105 days people are considered uncompliant list? And so I know grants and other things come into play. Is that when the building permit also comes into play, that a developer could use that?
Correct.
Okay, so there's that as well. Thank you. And Councilmember Rosales, did you have any question?
Thank you, yes.
So, I did forget about this. So you said out of the first workshop that we said we need affordable housing, senior housing, and larger households. So I know you mentioned some other things as far as increasing density, inclusionary housing, the list from earlier, but what other recommendations do you have or the staff have for us to accommodate that? Like maybe, what about the percentage? Should we move the percentage to what it is currently to increase the extremely low and the lower income? Is that a recommendation you give, or any other recommendations you would give to accommodate that?
Yeah, we've shared some strategies, and we included many in the housing plan of the document. So a lot, it's, you know, technical assistance for like state grants. That's a good one. So almost it's tough when you don't have the capacity to provide technical assistance to every applicant, but that technical assistance to get grants to fund you know, more affordable housing for larger building sizes and that particular thing. But typically we do it through the housing programs, such as like incentives, concessions, those types of things.
And as far as our current percentage breakdown, would we shift that?
For the RENA?
Yeah.
For the RENA, so that one is just what we received from the state. So that one, we don't have the option to break it down. You know, we would like. Technically, the very low and the extremely low, that's one bucket. So if you'd like, you can move all of those into the extremely low, because it would still be considered just very. Anything that's in very low or extremely low would be just considered in one bucket. Got it, thank you.
Move on.
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna fly through these because I know, we went through this as well. Oh, there we go. Right, so these are just the different sections. There's a lot of text here. It's all in the documents, so it's just kind of high level summary of each of the sections. Sorry if I speak fast. This is just it's a lot, so we're gonna go through this. So in our first appendix, so appendix E, we title it the housing needs assessment. So I like to think of it as like a community profile. So it's a snapshot. Who are we as a city? You know, what are our groups, special needs groups, broken down by categories you see on the screen. What's our population size, our growth projections, where our ethnic and demographic breakdown, what's our income breakdown. We look at our existing housing stock, you know, the age of our housing, the size of our units, different categories existing. We kind of just analyze that and kind of pull out some of the key points from there and then pull it into, we summarize it, and then if there's any clear issue that we find in our analysis, we'll address it through our housing. Again, with the housing constraints, so there's three main constraints that we look at: non-governmental, these are market forces; governmental, so where our local laws, our municipal codes, and code, and then our infrastructure constraints. So we try to analyze that to see if there's any barriers to affordable housing and barriers to fair housing. Then we have our housing resources appendix. So this is the appendix where we look at what are some of the resources we have to facilitate housing in general, to facilitate affordable housing. So this can be grants, different funding programs, state level, regional level, that we can access to help facilitate. And then we have our policy plan. So this is kind of where we summarize our actions, our metrics, our goals for the 6-cycle period. It establishes various programs meant to make housing, specifically affordable housing, easier, more feasible, and this is how we prove and show to resident stakeholders, ultimately to HCB, that we can do this, we can accommodate our housing. This is how we look at our housing goals and policies. So overall themes of our policy programs are just guidelines that kind of guide our housing actions, our housing programs to facilitate. Again, what do housing elements do? You know, we get input, we look at our analysis, and then we act on our analysis with specific actions. We have specific metrics that we want to meet, and we also have a time frame for to meet those actions. Also, we identify where our funding source would be. It can be CDBG funds, general funds, grants, stuff like that. And then we have implementation steps. These are our 5 overall goals. We have specific programs within each goal, but we have these overall 5 goals. I'm not going to go through all of them, but in the document, we highlight these at the beginning of the housing policy section, these 5 goals, and what we're trying to do with these 5 goals. This is one of the sample policies. So this is an actual policy that's in the document. This is specifically for ADUs. So you'll see kind of an intro of what this program is, and then this in the bullet points, you'll see the specific actions. So you'll see the first one, update our local ADU ordinance to comply with state law. There's been a lot of updates recently. You'll see develop permit ready ADU plans. So this is essentially pre-approved plans that you have to adjust for specific conditions on a specific parcel, but essentially if the applicant complies with the guidebook that's going to come with these pre-approved permit ready plans, it streamlines the process. Staff will already know what these plans are. Just make sure they comply with existing development standards, and it makes it a lot cheaper for applicants, the design process, the drafting process. Various actions that are associated with this. On the very bottom of the little box, you'll see the time frame. So that's the goal that we set up for ourselves to comply and commit to these actions. So then the second biggest, every section is important, but the housing plan and then our site inventory are kind of the teeth of this document. So we go to the site selection. So we have a whole site selection strategy. So we're required to identify sites to accommodate arena. Typically, usually, and always, we want to site these parcels next to services, resources, public transportation. We want, of course, them to have access to utilities, infrastructure, because that can be cost prohibitive in many cases. And when we select our sites, we want to make sure we're affirmatively furthering fair housing, so we're accommodating sites integrated into communities where they're not going to be isolated. So we don't want to put, above moderate income units in an area that is almost exclusively already above moderate. We kind of want to distribute sites to integrate, all socioeconomic backgrounds and households in every area you see. And then HCD allows us to make certain assumptions based off of density size. So at the bottom, you'll see that zoning to accommodate 20 dwelling units or more can be considered low. So you'll see right now in our site strategy, because we didn't have too many areas that allow 20 dwelling units or more, we took the strategy of rezoning on high density, so we take advantage of lower. Here it's very small. You'll see this is our overall strategy to summarize. So you'll see at the very, very top of the yellow, that's our remit. So that's what we're required to develop. And we kind of chip away at that number, at that requirement based off of our projected ADU construction. So we estimated that in the planning period, based off past performance. So in the last 3 or 4 years, we took the total ADUs developed during that time, averaged it out, and projected that out over 8 years. And we got 136. And as you see the sample program, the city's trying to make it easier for ADUs to be developed. So you can see that assumption is very reasonable and very conservative to estimate that 136 will be developed. If you have permit ready plans, you can easily see, the city can get a lot more than just 136, but that's a reasonable assumption based off of past studies. Then we have pipeline projects. So these are projects that are in either approved but haven't been developed yet, or are currently being reviewed and anticipated to be approved and developed during this planning period. Sorry. Then we have residential zones. So this is existing zoning, and these are sites that we've accommodated on existing parcels with their existing zoning. And then we also have accommodation the same like units. And then you'll see with all of that, we still had an outstanding need of over 2,000. And that's why we took 4 rezone strategies in 4, well, not different areas, but kind of distributed throughout the city, but 4 kind of target areas. This was strategic to kind of take advantage of vacant land or land that's suitable for higher density and increase the density there to accommodate our needs. We'll break it down really quick, but here, this first slide, you'll see existing capacity. So this is areas that are existing, already zoned, specific zoning, we accommodated on these parcels. We have the North Gateway rezone, so this is the parcel north part of town, and increase the density here to 65 dwelling units in that parcel. Then we have the high density residential zone. A lot of these parcels again are in the north. There's some kind of here in the center, and these are also 65 dwelling units. The mixed use rezone area here as well. You'll see kind of scattered. Most of them are vacant. You can see that these are areas that were specifically chosen because they were beautiful for land right for development. I believe these are also 65 dwelling units. And then we have the downtown mixed use. So these are all scattered throughout the downtown area. And the density here was increased to 145. Then, if we have any questions, we can question on those and next couple sides of this next steps.
Say you want to.
Sure, yeah, if you have any questions.
You want to start with some, you want to start, some of this.
Thank you. So this is for staff, I think, and I'm not sure if everything else or not, but when we're looking at specific policy and then actions, so the specific policy to me, I mean, it makes sense, it's very broad and very general. And then you align an action with it. But what have we done in the past as far as measuring those actions? Like, did we do what we said we were gonna do? Is there a process in place to do that? And how are we gonna do that moving forward with the last cycle?
So I can address this a little bit. So each year, the city prepares our annual progress report on the housing element. I can tell you that there's a lot of things in our fifth cycle that the city didn't really do. So you'll be seeing that report actually coming to you soon. It's statutorily due to the state April 1st, so you should be seeing it next month at city council for your review. But the plan is and to continue, so we'll start reporting on the sixth cycle housing element once it's adopted. And as you kind of have staff who's been here through the development of the plan, we have an understanding of what it says, and our goals will be to bring these things forward in the timeline. That's allotted by the plan. Most of the policies you'll see are coming in 1, 2, 3 years, because part of sixth cycle, and I believe it's also identified as a policy, is that I believe it's in 3 years, you have to kind of reevaluate and assess your sixth cycle housing element. And if things aren't working, if you're not progressing, you need to relook and possibly amend your sixth cycle to address the state and say, you know, we tried this policy, it's not working, or we tried this policy, it's great, and it's working really well. But annually, you prepare an annual progress report, reporting on each of the policies, each of the actions, and what's been taking place.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, I guess, is like, we're doing all of this work, but what if we don't follow through with it? And then there's overturn on the council, overturn on the staff, so what's the point? And then I guess another thing, Ms. Kelly, Mr. City Manager, if you can specifically forward, I like the specific actions. I feel like we're talking in very broad generalizations, but I want to know what the specific actions are to follow through with those. I think it was like the 5 recommendations, maybe. If we can get those or just point them out to us, that would be nice. Because I think if we want to tweak anything, we should probably look at tweaking that. And then, yeah, and what can we do to ensure whether we're here or whether you guys are not here, that we're really doing these things, because if not, then we're not really gonna change the dynamics here, right? That would be helpful. Sorry, I forgot what I wrote here. Oh, so yes, I guess it ties into what I just said. It looks like we're gonna resolve these issues by doing the North Gateway, higher density, mixed use, etc. And to me, it looks like, okay, wow, we're really gonna significantly change the look and feel of the city. We're really gonna, move forward with meeting the needs of housing of our residents. But I think if we're not following through those actions, we're not gonna get any of this done too. So that's probably what my biggest concern is.
Yeah, I mean, the general plan, and then this is an element, is really your vision document for the next 20 years, this being the 8 years. So as those get passed and the policies get passed, or the policies within it get passed, that's our work plan. And so as staff, we need to be reviewing that, bringing that forward and building our budget against that. So when we bring a budget forward, staff, if you're going through the proper processes, are not only reviewing what's needed, but what we had said we would do in the general plan, and bring that forward in the staffing plan to align with that. And so that's why these documents are so important. It's your vision for the future, and really our goal book of how we move forward and what policies we need to bring forward. And when staff are preparing them, they're looking at the timing of those policies and what they can get done in each year.
That's a good point too. I like that you put a specific time. I like that you guys included the specific time too, because then it's tangible, something real, right? That's something done by the state. I like that.
And if I might just add something on the rezone strategy specifically, we kept everything in line with the proposed general plan, zoning or rezoning and the changes in density there. So the hope is that this document, whether the rezones come as a separate housing element follow-up, it'll be in compliance with the overall general plan update that's being drafted right now. And it's also important to note that a lot of the sites that were identified as being rezoned and the capacity is purely a rezoned capacity. With the exception of the North Gateway, all of those currently have a residential capacity of some kind, but just the way you report in the document, you identify that that's the strategy. So I do believe we have a table in there that has kind of existing capacity. Let's say there's an acre site that currently allows 8 to 12, that might have an existing capacity of 120, but if we're upselling that, what we're proposing it is a rezone and then it has the proposed zoning. So we're being in compliance with our general plan update. But you might see that our existing capacity looks a lot lower than it actually is because we're identifying those sites not with their current density, but with the proposed rezone on top. That makes sense. So all of the questions? Okay, Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, so, for the planning staff, how many full-time employees do we have currently?
You currently have 2 full-time employees, myself and Amber Cameron, and then we have full-time contract staff, 2 senior planners and 2 planning. So there's a total of 6 of us.
Total for 6.
Yeah, we're currently, if I may, we're currently recruiting for senior planner and 3 assistant/associate planners right now. Those are open and accepting applications.
Perfect. One of my thoughts is, this is a lot of work with all the other daily activities that planning staff does. This is not business as usual, but it seems like other duties of the time. And so for me, I'm wondering what strategies are in other cities to ensure that these things are monitored on a timely basis to ensure that at the end of the year, because my concern is we're going to get this report from planning staff around April 1st. And it's going to show some things that will have concern for us. But I think as council member Resendez indicated, we get that, but where do we go from there to ensure that we fix what's not happening and not find ourselves in this position? And I'm wondering, city manager, if this would be another duty is assigned to the assistant city manager or the deputy city manager, or if even we consider maybe bringing on a housing ombudsman to not only deal with this, but to also work with the development community, because you can put anything you want in writing, but if the community doesn't buy into it, it's shelved. It becomes a, you know, from what I heard, there are really no significant consequences as long as we have a plan. And so
So on March 11th, our assistant city manager will begin employment here with the city, which I'm happy to say. That particular individual will oversee the development services department along with a handful of other departments that are all tied to development and working with businesses in the community. And so that will be the #1 focus, is working to ensure that these type of projects happen, as well as working with the community on customer service and just ensuring that we have a more streamlined process.
my understanding is the actual comes to us too with the community development background. That's perfect. And so last question, maybe premature, but I'm going to ask it now. As this plan evolves, often we hear the term in lieu of fees, and how can that be applied to the arena numbers, or do we remind me, do we currently have a city policy or ordinance that speaks to in lieu fees?
In lieu fees in what regard, Councilmember Burns, like specifically for affordable housing?
Yes.
We do not currently. I don't know if we have specifically a policy in this draft plan speaking to developing an in lieu fee, but we certainly have policies. I believe there's a couple related to an analysis of our current fees, our current impact fees, as well as considering certain incentives for affordable housing. So those are some of the policies you'll see in section 2. That's the kind of, again, as Brian mentioned, the meat of the document aside from the actual sites analysis. And so kind of in a conglomeration of those 3 or maybe it's 4 policies, something that we'll be looking at if the policy is adopted as proposed is looking at our current user fees, our current impact fees, potentially some in lieu or other incentives to help facilitate the development of this housing, including the affordable housing. So to kind of the questions that were posed earlier, It's not just rezoning, it's not just upzoning, it's not just inclusionary, but you're looking at policies for analyzing the city's fees, analyzing the city's processes. Perhaps there are things that we can make a ministerial level approval at the staff level, where, you know, the city council adopts objective standards. That's one of the policies. And that's kind of the beginning of the world, and the planning world right now is moving towards objective standards that are adopted by the legislature. And then it's staff that implements those to streamline processes. So you're seeing a lot of spectrum of proposed policies.
Perfect answer. Thank you so much. Thank you, man.
That's really- yeah, that's really nice. Yes, so it looks like the recommendations or strategies are gonna give the city of Hollister a completely different look and feel. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of how this is kind of gonna play out?
I don't know that the recommended strategies directly are proposed to give the city a different look and feel. Again, the densities are coming from the draft general plan. And I will tell you that looking at, again, I know the biggest, scariest one is 125 units an acre in the downtown. But something to consider is all of the parcels in the downtown are very small. So for example, one of the projects that's under construction now is the 500 block, where they're proposing 12 units above the Baylor, which is formerly Hollister House. And those 12 units in an existing established 4-story building are hitting that high end of the density. So you might see overall across the whole downtown more units, but it's really a density proposal to allow for feasible financial construction in these established buildings. If we don't have the lot sizes to really be seeing 6-7-story buildings, it's really squeezing, instead of 3 total units, perhaps 6 or 8 total units in a 3 to 4-story building. In the downtown.
If I can add, maybe ask you for a little clarity, and you touched on it a little bit, but maybe it may be beneficial. I spoke earlier about the timing of this kind of going hand in hand with the general plan update. Ms. Kelly was talking about the fact that the zoning that you used for this is in alignment with the general plan that is being worked on right now. So to have different zoning on 2 different documents going at the same time could create conflict down the road, probably one or both in conflict with each other.
Yes, so let me see how I can speak to it in a little bit of a different way. We've identified that there's not enough vacant sites in the city of Hollister at the current densities that are allowed to not have any sort of rezone. But where the rezones are coming from is the city's direction that's being established alongside this plan through the feedback and the draft general plan and the feedback of the council on that plan, so that those 2 plans are in alignment. There could be potential where we identify a different, perhaps estimated capacity of these vacant sites, and then we identify more, but you'd likely be looking at more North Gateway vacant sites, and it's really going to be just making a more conservative estimate of build out. For example, right now, the mixed use zones that we're seeing, the numbers that you're seeing in the plan are assuming a 65% capacity of that max density. So one other thing to keep in mind is that there's a proposed buffer, I believe 20% on each of the arena numbers, so that we're planning for more than our exact arena, because the city, while we can plan for growth, we don't develop. So you could see a site where we said 65% of the site was, let's say, I'll just say 65 units. And then so in our plan, we said that site would have 65 units. And then someone could come and propose 100 units if that meets the density. And then that's great, you got more units. But someone could also propose, let's say, 45 if that meets the minimum end of the density. And what we don't want to occur is when you report in your annual progress report to the state, you have to say which sites are less than what you planned for. And when you run into that negative and run out of the buffer, then you have to start rezoning other sites to accommodate them. So that's part of these numbers as well. Is that buffer?
I had a question about the rezone table on table F7. So there's rezoned non-vagrants. And those folks didn't inform me if they're on this list.
We haven't done a property notification.
Along that line. We just change your zoning and don't tell them? Or it's just because they should be proactive and be paying attention? I mean,
So for the most part, the city council is kind of directed through the general planning process to propose zoning, or it's up zoning a site that already has that zoning, so we're not actually changing the zone, we're changing the capacity of the zone. For example, they might already be zoned high density, and the proposal is a rezone to a higher density, but it's still the same zoning, so in that sense, for the most part, there isn't too many sites that are actually being changed, and all are in alignment with the direction of the general plan.
Yes, so I had a question regarding the fifth cycle. So we were short 1,800 units. Does that get added to the 163?
It doesn't get added, but Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, there are some requirements as you're preparing your sixth cycle for sites that were identified in your fourth cycle, as well as sites identified in the fifth cycle, that if they are still vacant, still haven't been developed, you lose some of the discretionary permitting rights to them. So you have to make ministerial approvals potentially available on those sites because they were identified for multiple cycles. So that's incorporated into the plan. I can't speak directly to exact fifth and fourth cycle sites that applies to, but it is part of the programming for the sixth cycle as part of the statutory requirements of developing this update. That those sites which you have identified as a jurisdiction to accommodate housing, and then it has been multiple cycles where that housing was not developed. That goes to kind of that same thing I was talking about earlier, where your strategy wasn't working. So you have to accommodate with a different strategy.
It's so I know the state comes up with the number, the 4100 number, with the formula or something with that number. Now, who comes up with the housing constraints? Is that through the city, or is that through the state?
Our
So
housing
there's-
constraints appendices.
Yes.
I would let Brian actually speak to that.
Yes, this is just based off of the analysis that's identified in appendices A through D. So ACD has a whole analysis essentially like guidebook and identifies what is a constraint. So you can kind of tangibly identify what we consider a constraint, at least in the guide of the state. And that's how we identify them, and it's based off of publicly available data. So we can identify that, and then there's also local constraints that we can identify that you wouldn't be able to see via data.
So was there any infrastructure constraints?
I believe in the past cycle, I believe sewer was an infrastructure constraint, but still sewer capacity can potentially be a constraint. But I think for this cycle we should be good. But I believe there's to increase capacity, I believe, to accommodate future housing.
Now, does that information get forwarded to the state when they come up with this number and they say, I mean, this grants become available to the city because we have expanders or expand our roads or whatever the case may be?
At the state level, it must be included in their justification, but when it comes to those more local issues, that's council governments who take that into account. In the SBCOG final RENA determination, it's like a 70-page document. In there, they have exactly what the constraints are, what's identified. And that's how they justify how to break down the units. So the 4,163, that came from, San Diego COG. But the COG itself had a total number, SB COG just broke it down by, unincorporated San Diego County, City of Hollister, and City of, so.
Thank you.
Just have a couple more questions. So when is the, you was talking about the property owners and whether to notify whatever, but I'm just curious, so if the zoning is going to change, say the one residential and it's being changed to housing. What does that, they'll say they want to develop something, how does that affect them? They have to do 65 units or whatever it is, or is it just, an option to do that?
No, so zoning is a range always, so the zoning for, I'll just say, every single mixed use and high density residential is proposed with a minimum of 30 and a maximum of 65. That's not adopted, even upon the adoption of this plan, that will not be an immediate effect, it will be a task of staff and then ultimately of the council to adopt that actual rezone. And that will be required to be compliant with the housing element if that's a strategy adopted in the housing element. But it will only take place as soon as it's adopted, codified in the ordinance. And then any development is required to comply with the city's plans, policies, and places of time.
The only other question, so I tried to look at this figure to me that shows the high density, it's rough to figure out, so I'm trying to ascertain, so there's a lot of high density, and it looks like it's right at Highway 25 in San Felipe Road, in my opinion.
You mind if I go grab the draft plan and pull it out?
Yeah, it's
Give me
it's
one.
so tiny and it's really hard to, I just want to make sure where I'm looking at the first time.
While she does that, can I ask, two more quick questions, Madam Mayor?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. The fourth and fifth cycle administrative, that worries me a bit. Is that something new in the sixth cycle?
Yes, so that's new, in the fourth and fifth cycle, so. If there's a site that was identified in the fourth cycle and it was non-vacant, and then an applicant comes in and proposes a development with at least 20% affordable, then it's a non-discretionary approval. So as long as they comply with the development standards, the city essentially, has to approve it. But that's only if it's a site that was used in the fourth cycle is vacant and proposes 20% or more affordable. So the intent is to incentivize.
Got it. And I would just imagine that our staff is going to be aware of that and they're going to be following up on that.
Correct, yeah, and it's state law, even without implementing
that's what I was
that,
wondering.
yeah, even without implementing it right now, that's what the law
Do
is.
you know the name of that law?
Government code, it's in section 4, you'll see it as like fourth and fifth cycle sites program. Yeah, it's it's in the, so, chapter 2, yeah, chapter 2. So it'll have the exact government code.
Okay, and then you said that infrastructure was a problem, but because we increased the sewer capacity to plan for future housing, it's no longer a problem?
Correct, and I think, it can always become an issue, but currently now, as it stands with our projection of housing, the city can meet its accommodation.
Okay, thank you.
So got it.
I have a figure.
So we are talking
That's
about
great.
San Felipe Road and Highway 25 as well, that one is just there. Is that-
Yes,
and
so,
on both sides of Highway 25 there. And like where the hotel is right there, it's like all of them.
yes, so we have, Highway 25, the kind of North Chapel Road area, as well as between San Felipe and 25, and then a large parcel on the west side of 25.
So in theory, we could have some highlights going in around there with some pretty heavy density. And just, it concerns me since that's like our entrance into town and we have a beautiful country and then boom, bunch of big. So that's a concern for me, but my question is, when I heard you talking about sites and choosing sites, I mean, I thought I understood that for high density, especially, you need to be in the transportation, you need to be near like shopping and services. This doesn't really fit that bill and there's not even sidewalks there. So how does that work?
So to this question of sidewalks, those are part of our requirements. So as sites develop, we do frontage improvements, we look at circulation and those types of things. As far as services, you have direct access to the surrounding North Gateway area, which is intended for commercial. There's also the county services kind of in that area, but also just generally, and you'll see throughout the document, there is limited transportation. And then it's also important to note that, and keep in mind the policies of the rest of the general plan. So you have those in draft in the update, but you also have a general plan that talks about different programs, actions towards circulation, transportation, and those things. So collectively as a whole, the city has goals to improve those facilities, but it's directly access to 25, that's kind of closest to commuters, so it reduces some DMT in that way. But it's also, you're proposing North Gateway to become a mixed use area in your general plan. So that would accommodate potentially supporting the commercial need in that area with some nearby housing and creating a walkable community there. So some of the North Gateway sites in the draft general plan, and that's where you're seeing these orange come in, are proposed to be rezoned through the draft general plan. So that's where the high density is coming from here. But you're also seeing general plan North Gateway as a whole becoming a mixed use area to hopefully promote some of that mixed use, walkability, pedestrian friendliness, connectivity between residential and commercial, as opposed to the isolated North Gateway. I see what you're saying. So, I mean, but in theory, not all these are going to be developed at once. There might be one that goes in. I can put sidewalks all the way into. Wait, how is that? Yeah, how does that work? So will that do want the walkability?
Yeah, so the rezones, they're proposed, they haven't been implemented, and once they are adopted, implemented, we can guide the development standards. So when you drop the development standard, you can add, specific provisions for sidewalk, landscape, all of that. So same with height, you can't restrict, you can't have, for example, 65 dwelling units that have a height restriction of 3 stories. That just wouldn't work, the numbers wouldn't work, but you can have a reasonable height restriction as long as you can accommodate the density on every single parcel of units. You can kind of guide the development standards once they're adopted.
I get what you're saying, but I know around the development itself, yes, sidewalks on. But if you look at where that's located, there are no sidewalks anywhere inside. So how is that walkable for people? Especially if you're trying to get a lot of people in there and maybe even some lower income, it's like they may be, on foot. And so are we going to be putting sidewalks? It concerns me how this puzzle would come together and whether, that particular area, there's so much high density, but is wise. I don't know.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it won't develop all at once, so you can't guarantee that it will all be walkable all at once, but the goal is to lay out the foundation so that.
Thank you, Grant. Real quick, maybe city manager, maybe a planning manager. Seems to me not too long ago, we actually talked to the council, certainly in the last 6 months, about a North Gateway development master plan, something that I don't remember the terminology for how it's going to be, the roads are going to be amended so that it is user friendly. And my sense is that would be in conjunction with the development that went out there.
Yes, so North Gateway is an area that was planned to have a master plan, a specific plan. And that's part of what you're seeing in the draft general plan update is a focus on really doing these detailed area plans so that development follows that detailed area plan. It has its own guidelines for landscaping, circulation. So you plan out the exact major corridors, the exact kind of landscaping and street types that you want, the land use areas, concentrating towards major roads or away from them, those types of things. And you'll see that is where the direction of the city council through the general plan has gone to, is really focusing in our next, I'll say 10 years on really master planning various large areas of the city, which is a pretty common strategy in other communities where they have these long-standing area plans that guide development and really detail down into exactly how that area is intended to be. And those plans become part of your general plan, the specific plan does, but they last 40, 50 years as these large areas develop out. So that's where the city's hoping to move, at least as we've been running so far.
Thank you for the clarification.
Move on to the next. Okay.
Almost towards the end, he's going to go over again an overview of where we've been, where we're going. So we had in last May of 2023, we had our first workshop, and then in December we had our first joint study session, and then a couple weeks ago we had the public review draft publicized and posted, and then today we're here at the joint study session. In 2 weeks we have workshop on the 28th here in this room at 6:30 p.m. The statutory 30 days concludes on the 29th of this month. Just to reiterate, this is not the last day the city is accepting comments. We're going to accept comments throughout the whole entire process. And that gets included in the engagement appendix. And then in early March, we will be submitting to HCB formally. And then once we submit to HCB, they have 90 days to review it. So give us comments, any findings if we're out of compliance with state law, if there's any, anything we missed, we have the opportunity to rectify that when we submit. But that will be 90 days from when we submit. And again, this is for the public, for all of you. We've received all your comments now, but we can also accept comments 3 different ways. So the first one, you'll see the city's website. At that link, you can find the document in full. You can see individual sections if you just want to see those. You'll have all the programs that's in chapter 2. And then you'll have in the appendices, all the analyses. You'll see the candidate sites in appendix F. And then on that same webpage, you'll see a link which will have a form where you can submit feedback, comments, questions. There's also on that same landing page, email subscription form. So as long as anyone who submits their email there, they're asking to be regularly updated on the process. So anytime you have an engagement event, a meeting, it'll be publicized to that email list. And then again, we have a dedicated housing element email. So any comment can be sent there as well. And then again, it can be sent in person or via mail to the city of Hollister. This is the page that you'll see once you submit in that form. It'll show City of Hollister. It's also available in Spanish on the same website. All you have to do is just press the translate button on the page and then submit. And then us and the city staff will receive that. This will all be summarized in the form and added into one of the fences. And that's it for us. We're here if there's any additional questions.
You have no preference? Okay.
Thanks. I'll start at the bottom. So that was one of my questions, the website. So aside from that first page that you showed us, what's the process look like? Is it a lengthy process? Is it pretty straightforward, easy process?
We hope for it to be a pretty quick process, but typically we've seen iterations of 2 to 3 submissions back to the state. So because there's been over 200 new state laws in the last 3-4 years, we've seen HCD have a comment letter. We have meetings with them, with staff, ourselves, and our reviewers from the state. We rectify whatever issues, we resubmit, and typically within 2 to 3 submissions, we do that.
So I mean, for as far as the public, so I'm seeing that we're having a problem with getting the public to submit comments. So the page that they click on, is it a lengthy process?
No, so
Very user friendly.
yeah, so they can click this link. If not, just look up Hollister, California. Once you go on the website, you'll be on one of the landing pages. you press it and it'll look exactly, it's a little small, but it'll look exactly like that. So it'll have the document in full, all the appendices, and right under it, you'll get these links to submit format. It's pretty quick. It's seamless. It's a Google form, so it could be, there's multiple choice, and there's a lot of free form as well, so you can submit there, and you can export it all out to get all.
Sure, okay, now I know how Google Forms work, so yeah, that was my question, I think. The workshops aren't really necessarily getting that much of the public engagement, and we could just real quick, like, housing, what do you think about housing? Click here, if we just blast that all over the place, I think you'll get a better turnout, I'll be honest with you. And I really like this event thing. Does the plan, so the plan that the mayor was speaking about, that she's concerned about the density increase there, but you're saying, Ms. Kelly, that increase in density does align with the special or specific site plan that Councilmember Burns brought out. Is that not correct?
So the density proposed in that area is consistent with the densities proposed and zoning proposed in the draft general plan. And the draft general plan has many policies related to specific planning and being a focus of the city in the next of after implementation in the next several years of the draft general plan. So specific planning of various areas of the city is a goal.
Okay, I wasn't sure, thank you so much.
Questions, we don't have a comment. Thank you for being patient.
Yes, Mayor Casey, we currently have one speaker and it is Carson Tall.
You have someone who's right now.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. First of all, I'd like to say terrific job to staff and consultants. Housing elements super difficult, super convoluted. Sometimes the endeavor doesn't always seem like it makes sense, but reading through the document, I didn't find myself mad a bunch of times, so that was kind of a good start. Anytime, whether you're a person or a city or a business, you want to spend time on what's important. You're spending time in mind on what's important. So I think that it seems like ADUs are an important subject for the state and the city. I would like to see that maybe going forward that the city have a dedicated contact person within the planning department regarding ADUs. It should be the easiest thing for anybody to build. Anybody who owns a property has a spot where they can put an ADU, most likely, unless they don't have a garage. I also think it would be great to have the pre-approved plans and base them off of plans that have been built in the city before. Construction is pretty simple in terms of shapes. It's mostly rectangles and squares. So if you can find a plan that works for the garage, build that out, have it ready for people when they come in. I'm concerned that the densities in the candidate sites don't reflect the economic reality of the recent past. I think that if it was feasible to build the way this is proposed, that you have a lot more buildings like the ones that are going to be proposed here. And that's before you factor in the future financial constraints that the city continues to put on construction. And I'm not going to say that any one regulation or fee is bad, because I really don't think that any of them are. But when you put them all together and when we look at the totality of actually trying to build something, it becomes very difficult and in many cases not feasible. That's why you have sites downtown that have been vacant for 35 years, as long as I've been alive. The downtown sites, I think you have to pay a developer to construct on them. The land is worth essentially nothing. And then when you factor in inclusionary housing and we talk about the percentages and everything and what you can rent, what you can sell them for, you're gonna have to pay people to build on some of these sites. I do agree with adding residential in North Gateway. Just give you a heads up, you're gonna have an issue with cannabis there because you have setbacks in that district. We do have existing cannabis facilities, so you have to do, okay, what are we gonna prioritize, or do we need to change the rule? Like I said, please, if somebody could put together all of the things that are expected of housing developer, housing provider, whether that's fees and regulations, that'd be great, because most people, when they start the process, they just have no idea how much it's actually gonna cost. Thank you.
Thank you. The next public speaker is Dennis Martin.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and Commissioners. I'm Dennis Martin, speaking on behalf of BIA Bay Area. And listening to the hearing tonight, there is one thing that seems to be clear, that the city should pause efforts on the housing element until the draft general plan, the amendments and revisions to the draft general plan are complete. After hearing all the caveats from staff and consultants that they were strained to put all of these units into the draft general plan, now you can pause this and go back to the draft general plan and rezone those sites and replan those sites so that they can accommodate the numbers that are here. Because right now, this rezone strategy is completely unworkable. I mean, 125 units in the downtown per acre, 65 units in high density residential. I mean, 125 units is an 8-story building with structured parking, and 65 dwelling units an acre is going to be 4 to 5 stories, 50 to 60 feet tall with structured parking. So this type of development, residential development, has not been proven to be feasible in Hollister, and your numbers show it. I mean, the plan itself, the housing element itself, contains data that shows that only 6% of the building permits pulled in the last 7 years are for multifamily 5+ units. So you really have no or very little, shall I say, market data to go on that these types of densities are achievable financially. So we ask that you rethink this, that you complete the general plan, and then come back and complete the housing element so that you can get this right. Otherwise, I'd like to mention that under the constraint section, we do view that the city of Hollister's impact fees and user fees are probably the highest in the region. And we would like to see that this element includes a table that benchmarks all of these fees from the various cities. We know that about 2.5 years ago, the city quadrupled its user fees, and we have remarked consistently that building permit fees for residential are the highest in the region. So we're very concerned about the fees, and we're going to be mentioning this in letters to the city and of course to HCD, that constraints in the city are very high in terms of fees. So thank you. We will be making further comments down the road, but I wanted to make sure we got on the record tonight and let you know that we have these concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next board speaker is William Rodriguez.
Good evening, council members and planning commissioners. I personally really like the numbers, what's coming out. I just kind of wanted to echo what Councilmember Roland Resendez was saying. It sounded like 40% of our population cannot afford market rate housing. So we do need those higher densities, because higher densities do, in essence, are going to be lower rents. And as far as the other gentleman's comment, I understand that, right now, when we look to the past, we look at the last market numbers, absolutely, it perhaps was not feasible. But going forward, this is our general plan. This is the city's general plan. This isn't, developers' general plans. This isn't the real estate industrial complexes general plan. This is Hollister's general plan. We get to facilitate our future. It's our vision, and perhaps it's not going to be feasible. Now, with that being said, going forward in the next 10 to 15 years, even 30 years, this is California's idea. This is the federal government's idea as well. Is that we have California high-speed rail coming to Gilroy. We have our rail line going to hopefully be Caltrain hopefully be extending from Gilroy to Hollister. We have to start thinking about this. Partnering with the county, partnering with our friends at Caltrain, that hey, we will have those higher densities. We got to prepare TOTs, transit oriented development. Yes, I agree, council members. We do not have the infrastructure in place right now for transit oriented development. I do agree that if we are leapfrog developing these developments and there's no sidewalks, I agree with you, Mayor, that we have to have something in place to where people can walk, where it's not just this sidewalk that goes into the dirt. I 100%, I will agree with you on that. Can we put policies in place that say, hey, you want to build the sidewalk, build the infrastructure. But as far as just looking to the past and saying we can't do it, no, we can do it. That's the future. We can't keep sprawling out, and that's one thing I'll just echo to the council. We have to start infill developments. This urban sprawl, single family development only, it's not sustainable, and we know it's not sustainable. So, anyhow, thank you for the hard work, staff, and for the time.
Who are all the public speakers you want? All right, so, some discussion, we'll start from the 7th.
I don't know.
No comments? I think this one on. Why is that not?
Because I read for 8 hours today. Okay. Some are comments, some are just pointing out things that have already come up in discussion here, but I'll just start in the beginning and I'll try to be quick, because I know we don't want to take forever. But when I looked at the policy H36, updated density bonus ordinance, the one thing that caught my eye was that it does state that Assembly Bill 2344 requires a density bonus of up to 80%, when a qualifying percentage of below market rate units are proposed. So that means if you got a full on below market rate, low income, you have the state density bonus of 80%, which is huge. So that was just something that stuck out. And then I had a question on the policy action H4 for replacement housing. So it talks about what happens when subject to vacant or demolished residential units that were occupied by lower income households, and then something happens to it. So I'm wondering, how does that relate to like a fire when we have an area that is affordable rentals and it burns down? The city will adopt a formal replacement housing program to ensure any units currently occupied in lower income households or households subject to affordability requirements, which are lost where housing units are replaced in accordance with this government code section. So it talks about things that could be earthquake, it could be a flood. So I want to know, does that include fire? It doesn't say fire. It says flood, it says earthquake. Then it doesn't say fire, and we have fires and it displaces people.
Have to look at the state law first.
Okay.
But I believe that, any housing that's.
Okay, because like I wonder if that includes fire, and maybe when we get to that point, we need to do that. So people, their old things burn down and then they're stuck with nothing. It's very expensive here.
And I would also just add, we would have to look at what this specific government code section is looking at. But this is the time frame on this, and just to confirm, we're looking at 4.5, H 4.5, yes.
We're looking at H5, where was it? I'm sorry. We're looking at H45.
Okay,
Right.
yes, so this is a time frame to adopt a program by January 2025. And so the city council ultimately would adopt this program, but the details of the program aren't established in the housing element. The housing element tells us what our action is. Our action is to adopt the program that will accommodate for replacement of housing that are lost, meeting this goal. But if there's something else that the city wants that doesn't necessarily align exactly with the government, we can't not follow the government code, but we can go beyond the government code. And if there's something that the city council and the planning commission want to put into a program like that, if the government code doesn't say fire, we can still put that this program works under fire, it works under earthquake. So the housing element doesn't have those equal, it just tells us, it guides us for the next 8 years.
Cool. That just came to mind because we have fire and people are displaced. I have another question on, policy plan, chapter 2, page 2 of 19. It's relating to fair housing actions, and it says we have to adopt an updated safety element, which we're doing, obviously in the general plan, which identifies natural hazards which pose an environmental constraint to development of housing. The city council shall adopt amendments to the safety element in accordance with 1035. What's 1035 saying? I mean, what's changing? The seismic zones don't change, the California state regulations that govern seismic, they don't think they changed. I didn't understand that.
And remind me again, it's page 219,
219,
in the table,
yes,
and
it's a lack of infrastructure due to environmental hazards.
yes, so part of our general plan update, as you mentioned, is amending our safety element, and our consultant working on that, Placeworks, is making sure that it's compliant with all state laws. So that's part of it. But you'll also have it kind of secondarily as a housing element program. But to your point of the fault zone, the fault law, it doesn't change often, but I can tell you that it actually just changed in October 2023. So they did amend that. So the laws are changing all the time. But part of the housing element is to make sure our safety element's updated. We are updating that as part of the general plan. And it will be compliant with state law at the time that it's brought forward for a draft for consideration.
Awesome, thanks. So then I moved on to appendix A, and it's review of past performance, kind of what council member Burns brought up as well. And I was reading the table A1, and it says services provided. So it says all these services that is available to seniors. I'm sorry, this is actually for seniors. So now we're talking about seniors, which is very important to me. So I wondered if we could add the organization name of City of Hollister, because I believe we give a senior discount for lower income seniors of sewer and water. And that's not mentioned as a service provided by the City of Hollister. Is that an appropriate place to put it or not?
And which is our current goal, if you will, or the page number that we're looking
Oh,
at?
that is A2.
A2.
A2 in the community resources for seniors.
So, that section, past accomplishments, so that's from the fifth cycle program, so just validating that. For that discount that you're, discussing, we can add it in the housing resources section.
Okay, cool. Just want to note it that it's an available, to the seniors, low income seniors. Which a lot of people utilize, so I'm happy about that. It's tough enough. Without enough money, it makes it tougher. All right, and then I'm gonna get going here. I'm gonna move to table A5. Where it is noted, and this is just for the record again, the city of Hollister collects and expends water and sewer impact fees from new development to implement necessary infrastructure maintenance and expansion throughout the city. So I just wanted for the record that we do collect and expend water and sewer impact fees from new development. The Public Works and Engineering Departments review and implement capital improvement programs where that money where it comes from the developers to do capital improvement programs annually to expand and improve necessary infrastructure. Okay, but then it also says status for the 6th cycle. Okay. It says the city is not eliminating the policy from active or planned work in future capital improvement programs. The city has in its current 2005 general plan, as well as within the draft 2040 general plan currently available public view, policies which support expansion and improvements of the city water and sewer infrastructure. So my point here is the work is being done to plan for services for growth, including the 6th cycle, the arena 6th cycle. So it talks about that in that cycle program accomplishments. Okay, and it talks about the city will continue to provide annual progress reports to the Department of HCD on OPR, Office of Planning and Research. So they do a lot of monitoring of the progress of the programs, and that's very important. And Councilmember Rosettis has a great point. You make laws, you gotta get them done. Don't do it as propose it. Maybe you can't meet it. So that was a good comment there. I'm in line with that. And then let's go up here. This one was at-risk units, H4, long-term housing affordability. And this is another question that comes up in the community about how do you monitor it's affordable? How do you ensure that it's affordable? So this is what addresses that. This is a program accomplishments for 2022. The city housing division manages and monitors the city's existing inventory of housing units. The city engages with homeowners and rentals in affordable units to ensure that the units remain affordable through the duration of their program. The city records and deed restrictions on new affordable units to ensure they remain. So that's an important thing here. We talk about affordable units and we want to make sure that it complies with this document. So we know the city has a monitoring program to make sure they remain affordable like we intend them to. Farm worker housing, it does say, it says here, farm worker housing is very important for us. Very important. We talked about it, but it's coming around now. I love it. So on farm worker housing, continues to work with the county to find solutions for farm worker housing. The city of Hollister's current zoning regulations permit farm worker housing within existing residential and mixed use zoning. So I just want folks to understand, we put farm worker housing as per this housing element all around the city, hopefully. And then this is just a general comment on program implementation status, and it's talking about annexing land in the sphere of influence of residential development. So the city will seek to annex unincorporated county islands with the sphere of influence as well as other within the sphere of influence for residential development. Now it says here, status of program implementation. The city supports the annexation of lands proposed for residential development that are located within the sphere of influence and contiguous to existing city limits. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I would really like to have commercial and industrial in there. We just talked about annexing land for residential development, but don't we annex land for commercial and industrial as well? Is that in a different, addressed in a different section?
We do, but this is a table of the programs from our fifth cycle housing element. So the programs in this particular chapter, if you will, the element of the general plan, are specific to housing. So
Okay, thank you.
yes, so this is our fifth cycle programs,
All right.
and it's specifically related to this.
Yeah. There was a lot of good things in the fifth cycle, and they just go on over into the sixth cycle, but let's see, getting there. Some things are already answered. I'm gonna read. Okay, the population growth. I want everybody to just, I'm not gonna go through it now. There is some really good information on housing needs assessment as they brought up. It tells you everything, all the demographics. I hope folks will review that part. Page 8, B1, it's all, and I learned all this in AMBAG, great information, tells you how your city is, what's it looking like. You know, it really explains it well, and I won't go through all that because it's there for folks to read. I enjoyed reading it. Then it does talk about, I have a question. I kind of couldn't quite figure out HAMFI. So HAMFI, and I know it's median family, median, what is it?
Which page are we on?
That's a B10. Yeah, but it's all through the document, identified as the following income categories based on HAMFI, so it's probably family, median, what is it?
Yeah, so there's two, so there's AMI, which is area median income, that's what
Okay.
HCD uses, so
Okay.
at the state level. HAMFI,
Yes.
HAMFI, it's the same thing, median family income, but that's at HUD, so that's at the.
Oh, that's a HUD?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's a HUD term, so.
All right.
We get that, data from HUD.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay,
It's
so,
virtually the same thing.
and then, again, good tables, households by income category, we'll have a lot of rich households in this city. A lot, we need more lower ones. Okay, and then we're talking about, again, senior housing needs, because again, that's important. I was on the committee for a couple of years over there in Watsonville for seniors. To address the challenges, the city should consider solutions to address the above issues, and we're talking about More affordable housing options for seniors, we already know this. Supportive city programs to help sustain decent and safe affordable housing dependent seniors. And once again, I'm calling this out because I promised the seniors I would kind of say stuff for them. Housing with included supportive services and group home options for persons with self-care limitations. We need to take care of our disabled folks and our seniors. Farm work is the only thing I was trying to say earlier was farm work have a special housing needs because they are lower incomes than many other workers and move throughout the year from one harvest location to the next. And aren't we glad they do, or we wouldn't have no food to eat? Okay. That's important. Okay, and then versus experience with homelessness, you know, it's always a big discussion here, and it's not gonna get any better. We really need to work with the county and we are. But I hope we can secure more funding to just kind of help this right here for our unhoused folks. Just so you know, 12% of our homeless were under the age of 18, which is the saddest thing ever. So overall, the unhoused population in the county increased by 26% from 2019 to 2022. 26%. So I'm really hoping we can work on some issues to address that. Okay, and then what do we need to do? That's construction costs. Well, you know, talks about land prices aren't a constraint, which I just agree with. I was surprised to see that they hit it, they put it in here. It says it's not. It says although construction costs are a significant portion of the overall development costs, they are consistent throughout the region, and especially when considering land costs, are not considered a major constraint on housing production in Hollister. Land costs may vary depending on if the site is vacant or has existing improvements, which is why we want to make sure we locate future housing where the improvements are already there. That keeps the land costs down, because I don't see how that's not a constraint. Land costs very a lot more than it used to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You know, it was so cheap, and we thought it was high then. That's kind of the funny part. Okay, I'm almost done. Local ordinances is enacted to maintain and improve public safety, healthy, and general welfare. So they want us to adopt ordinances such as inclusionary housings or short-term rental ordinance. Locally adopted ordinance such as inclusionary ordinance may directly impact the cost of supply of residential developments. I'm not sure. Okay, this is what I'm trying to say. Impacts may create governmental constraints to the development of housing and may hinder the city from meeting its share of regional housing need and the need for housing for persons with disabilities, supportive of housing, transitional housing. So we know that could be, you know, it could be constraining, but it could be constraining. We know this. Then there's a discussion on development fees, and we all know the story there. You got to have the studies to justify the development fees. So that's always ongoing, you know. The city does have fees consistent with regional and state averages for most application types. I think the application fees have gotten a bit high, but probably another discussion. But in answer to Carson, his comments over there, $56,000 of impact fees for a single family dwelling. And then water is also another very important issue. So it says the water supply. The city's latest urban water management plan in collaboration with the county water district, San Benito County Water District, and Sunnyslope County Water District demonstrates that the city has planned for water supply for all planned growth. As the state requires through the regular urban water management plan updates, the city is able to provide sufficient water capacity to accommodate the regional housing needs. So, you know, they say we have water, and I think we do. Not on the dry multiple years. I'm almost done. So, the city has, okay. Infrastructure and public safety capacity as described in the Hollister's 2040 General Plan Public Review Draft EIR. City has sufficient infrastructure and public services to accommodate future development. So we're always hearing about we don't have infrastructure. We don't have put the infrastructure in. Put this now. It's already there. It's most places. Then I love how the city, they adjust the net density versus the gross density, and that was a good way to hide the density, and thank you very much. I hope I wasn't too boring, but that's what I got for today. Thank you.
Thank you. So just following up on my earlier question about the rezoning, the non-vacant. So I think what I heard you say was that we don't have to worry about things we need to change for those people because the zoning is not changing too much to require redoing the properties or.
So the zoning is changing, the densities are changing allowed on properties, but most of the properties, this would have happened, let's say the 6 cycle wasn't what we're looking at right now. Those changes are proposed in the draft general plan. So the city's proposing those changes multiple ways. This document is reflecting them to accommodate our housing need because the city's already been looking at changing those densities over the past several years. If that makes sense. And if that didn't answer your question, let me continue.
So I'm curious, so I'm wondering if somebody has a property now that's being rezoned, what's the scenario where their property gets changed? How does that happen? Somebody. Yeah.
So they have the development potential that they currently have. So let's say they currently are zoned high density residential. If they wanted to come tomorrow to the planning division to submit a development application, they certainly can. They have the development regulations, zoning, setbacks, height restrictions, and the density restrictions that they currently have. And through the adoption of the rezone, if that's the strategy of the housing element as currently proposed, when the city does that rezone following adoption of the housing element, at that point, they will then have new development standards, just like when we adopt a new code. If we change the setbacks in a zone, it affects that zone citywide. And any new development that's proposed after that zone change, the zoning ordinance change, has to follow the new zoning ordinance. So their zoning change would take effect at the time that it's adopted by the council. That would be an ordinance, which technically would be 3 days following the adoption of the rezone officially by the city.
Okay, so I take it that these non-vacants are part of the excess of numbers that you're trying to.
Yes, and so specifically with regard to non-vacant sites, the 6 cycle requirements for finding a site that meets all the eligibility requirements to be a site, they're very stringent. I can have Brian talk more about those specific requirements, but we're looking at non-vacant sites that likely have a relatively larger lot. A lot of them are probably zoned are Old Town medium or Old Town high density. That's where you're seeing already development capacity under our current ordinance. Those are zoned for multifamily. But our new zoning densities will allow for slightly more. They don't have to redevelop their whole site. They could find an accommodation or propose a project that might work with the vacant area of their site, or perhaps they might propose a redevelopment project. The only requirement of the city and of their proposal in the future would be that it meets all the regulations in place at the time of their proposal.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to, it was stated before that about 40% of our population is low to extremely low. And I noticed that the numbers that are being proposed are 36%. So it's good that the numbers are close. They're not exactly the same, but I'm glad to see that the numbers are close to what the population is. That being said, it's important that units do get built because we got a lot of people in the community cannot afford to buy a home, and but also at the same time we're hearing from some of the development community that a lot of this is not feasible. So, and you mentioned that there's gonna be check-ins during the sixth cycle, the check-in to see how things are going, so. Is economic feasibility one of the things that gets checked on during when you do that?
So I don't know if economic feasibility very directly is checked, but as I mentioned a little bit earlier, some of the policies are in an effort to address those things that have been potentially identified as constraints, right? And we've identified and heard from the community that our fees are potentially a constraint on development. So one policy in the housing program is to look at the fee schedule and to look at potential incentives to allow for affordable housing, to look at modifying those fees, doing a new fee study. So those are how we address those concerns. Is through policies like that. So those are in here, they're proposed, they have timelines. And that's how we're addressing those types of concerns that have been raised.
Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Well, thank you for the report. I know that we have a lot of items coming back to city council, the police studies, ED policies, and they'll be coming up in a couple months, we can manage them. Okay. Yeah, so look forward, thank you so much for the report.
Thank you for the report, it's very informative. There's only two questions that I have to make for the answer already. Thank you.
No, I do have a couple follow-up questions, combined with the comment. So I think former Councilmember Flowers' point about having master plans or plans available for ADUs is a good thing. I don't know if we already don't, then I think that would be good. And I'm familiar with at least 2 or 3 jurisdictions that I know already have them. Just because you have them doesn't mean people are using them, but it'll certainly eliminate additional costs, and I do believe it would encourage people for JAVs and ADUs. I think that's a great step forward. And then my question comment was actually revolved around the DIA and their conversation about how we need to hit pause on this thing until we finalize the final draft and review of the general plan. And I will say, initially I thought that makes a lot of sense, but then I also understand that we're kind of under pressure to push this thing forward because we're already delinquent. And so we've got that limited amount of time. Do we know when the general plan is going to be ready to roll? So that my concern is if we might not see the general plan until June, and we're already past the deadline of December 15th, if I recall what we said. So it's not feasible to do that. But if it was, in my mind, it kind of makes sense to try and align them all. So any thoughts, comments, please?
Sure. So the draft general plan right now is not anticipated to be coming back before the commission and the council till pretty much the end of the year. That's the timeline that we're on with that right now. And I will say, as far as pausing, I wouldn't recommend it for 2 reasons. One is, as you mentioned, the statutory requirements and the potential effects of not having a certified housing element, but also this housing element and the proposed policies, specifically the densities that we're proposing and the sites that we've selected as the draft candidate sites, are based on the general plan that we've seen and submitted to the public, submitted to the council, and the feedback and explicit direction that we're following right now to get that finalized. So I wouldn't see potentially a benefit unless there was a plan to significantly amend the fundamental densities and concepts of the land use in the draft general plan. This document is following that. It's reflecting the conversations that have already been happening over the years that the general plan's been being drafted. So we're not pulling densities from nowhere. We're not pulling sites from nowhere. We're taking the feedback of that document that happens to be ongoing at the same time as this document to guide this document.
Okay, final question. Is this report that we received, the draft housing element, is that also available in scan?
The document itself is not available.
Is there I was gonna say a reason, but is there a way that we could have this to word so that it would be available, given the fact that we have a significant Hispanic population and not all of them are going in Greenwood?
Yeah, it will probably be a significant undertaking. I don't believe it's something we can just pop into Google Translate. We have to hire a third party to translate the entire document.
Thank you.
Councilman Flores, things.
Thank you. So a couple of comments. As far as the BIA's comments, I disagree with them. Pausing efforts, and I see that there's concerted effort on their part to decrease the density. And that makes sense to me because from the developers community, there's no money making as far as increasing the density, right? And for them, it's not going to be quote unquote feasible, but it seems like from the conversation that we're having from you and from the workshops that that's what we need the most is more affordable housing, low income and extremely low, and we do that by increasing the density. So that doesn't make logical sense to me what the request is. Commissioner Lenore pointed out that work is being done to accommodate for growth as far as the sewer goes, and I don't disagree with that. She also mentioned that we collect fees so that we can do that. But one of the things we often don't talk about is that those fees that we do collect can be used down to pay down the debts that we already owe for the existing sewer. And that would in turn lower the fees that our residents are now paying, right? So instead of accommodating for future growth by increasing the capacity of the sewer, and this has already been done and decided, we should have paid down the debt that we owe with that money, but Commissioner Lenore forgot to point that out. With Commissioner Henderson's comments, I think this is what I got out of it, that we're asking for the legal obligation that we have to inform existing residents of zoning changes. I'm not sure if that was answered, and I guess I'm wondering the same thing. Do we have a legal obligation to inform existing residents when we rezone? There's noticing requirements? Okay, perfect. So they'll be noticed. Thank you for that. Yeah, I already talked about 40%, and it's very important that we get these units built. Commissioner Henderson also mentioned the same thing. And if we're not building them, he mentioned that we're going to do the check-ins. So as far as the check-ins go, it looks like from what I heard from your recommendations, in order to accommodate the low, extremely low, aka the affordable housing that we're still lacking here, we want to do inclusionary housing ordinance, we want to do increased density bonus, we want to do incentives, etc. Well, we're not doing inclusionary housing. It seems like there's a concerted effort to decrease the density. But I like the idea of when we come back and do the check-ins that we then offer those incentives. So it looks like we get a little bit creative with the way that we encourage affordable housing here. So that's something to keep in mind, I would say, in the future. I'm concerned about the public engagement aspect. I brought that up. If we can look at some ways to get the community involved, in particular the Latino community as well. I know that we don't have a legal obligation to get everything completely transcribed into Spanish, but if we can invite them and maybe the publications that we put out, maybe the website can be translated to Spanish, that might not be such a huge undertaking, and offer the program that we just got for them to utilize as well. Yeah, and then that's pretty much it. Thank you. It was a really great report. Appreciate it.
Just a few more comments and I think we're off the hook. One is a very easy one. On page B2, we're looking at the population growth. And as I was looking at it, I just noticed that projected like 2030 for San Diego County says like 73,000, but 2035 says 44,000. Is that just a typo? 44,638. I mean,
The table B1 on page B.
yeah, at the top there at 2035, it goes down like 30,000 people from 2030 to 2035. So maybe there's a number, something missing there.
I'm seeing an increase, Mayor Casey.
Well, 2030 is 73,000.
That's,
Oh, that's
2035.
oh, the county. Oh,
Sorry,
yes.
at the very top.
That does look right.
Yeah, I think there's just something that's correcting there. So that one was easy. So that's.
Yellow right underneath.
That just jumped out at me. And then, so my next question is, reading on page 2-5, the policy action H1.4. I'm just curious about by right requirements, like what that is and, where does that come into play?
So by right requirements, and I'll tell you that it's not a super concern in the city of Hollister. What that means is that you cannot require a conditional use permit for residential development. I don't believe we require a conditional use permit for residential development anywhere. So I don't believe that that's a concern particularly, but that's what that means. It means that you can't require a discretionary use permit that, you can say, I don't think I want this use on this site for X, Y, Z reason. You have to allow the use in the zone, non-discriminatory.
Okay, that's simple answer, thank you. So just, comment wise, I'm hearing the concerns, I want to make sure we get things built, so we need some, options. And while I understand the reason for high density, I am worried about it because I'm hearing things about feasibility. And one of the things I've heard from folks in other cities that they've got projects they're trying to get built and they're trying to go up and they're talking steel and they're talking concrete, and all of a sudden the cost is, exponentially higher. So how are you going to get low income housing built if projects are not being built? And that's my concern, I guess. I mean, I get the theory and the desire to go higher density, but I'm worried that, just because we zone it doesn't mean that anyone will come, and it's like, I want to make sure we actually get projects built. So I know, I heard you say that we're gonna be doing, so this is not carved in stone. And is that like in a year? And I just,
Yes, so annually, the city is obligated to review, both, we do a general plan progress report on the general plan, and we do a housing element annual progress report on the housing element specifically. Both are submitted to the state. You'll be again seeing both shortly for 2023 calendar year. And one of the things that I would encourage the council to consider when we're talking these densities, they are unprecedented, right, in the city of Hollister. So it is one thing to potentially have these infeasibilities, right? But we're proposing, looking at, again, fees, looking at other concerns. But also when you're hearing things like there's no historic documents to say that it's feasible, that while true, the densities currently that we're seeing in the city of Hollister are not what we're hearing from the community as what we want to continue to see. So the general plan is proposing a different direction, an infill focused direction. And as you've mentioned, the general plan can be changed. We've talked about this. The general plan can be changed at any time, but I would urge the council and the planning commission to consider a policy change and see if it works out, as opposed to kind of knocking it before you try it, because what we're hearing from the community as staff, especially through the general plan process, is a desire for potentially a different direction.
I get that. I will tell you that I don't think people are very vigilant when they say, yes, we want higher density, we want this. I sit on that hill, and this week we passed a group of angry residents come in because someone had tried to do an annexation of the development himself and brought it in. It was, a density, you wanted to go up, and there were a lot of folks that showed up, and it wasn't even really widely advertised, but we had neighbors screaming, why are you doing this? We're 1-story homes. You want to put 3 and 4 stories here? And it's like, I can see this coming. Everybody says, yeah, you want the high density, and they don't know what that looks like. And that's what I was getting at with the entry coming in. And if suddenly we got this as we're coming into town, it is going to change how our town looks and feels. And I just don't think people realize that that's what's going to happen if we do end up with it. But that said, I do need to house people. I want to make sure we have options. I like what Councilman Burns talked about with the ADUs. I think that's a great way to spread people out and have, because that is a more affordable option. And I guess we'll just have to give this a try and see. It's all we can do, but I am hearing things outside of our region that stuff isn't going to be built because it's too expensive. And maybe just the economic times that steel and everything costs so much. But it does work. So anyways, that's it. That's all I've got. So thank you for a great report and for all the info.
If I might, to 2 points, one from Councilman Burns and one from Councilman Burns, and this Councilman Burns, you talked about the 3 to 3 ADUs. That is both in the ADU policy, but in the housing element, but it's also a new law, a new state law that we're required to have that, I believe, by January 1st, 2025. So that's something we'll be working on as a city. And then to Councilmember Lucinda's point of translating the website, our website is currently translated. All of the language about the links, the document itself is not, but all of the language, all the links, all of our social media posts and emails have been translated together.
So, I know that this would be a significant task, that is a significant cost. So, we should sail on that, but when we roll out the general plan draft, what I hope would be the last round. I'm optimistic it's throwing in here. Now I'm not even sure we'll be on council then, but, I'm wondering if, it could be in Spanish as well. This, the last time I checked, I saw all of it 60% Hispanic. And so, it just makes sense to me when we get sort of like community better. And so that would be very well. Thank you.
And that gives us time to look and the cost of that. I just want to say thank you to both the city council and the planning commission for coming in on special meetings. This has been quite a process for staff. I want to just thank the planning staff. We talked a little bit about grants and from HCD. They were able to actually secure a grant, use 2 different grants from HCD to pay for all of the consulting costs and all the work that went into this. So this, other than their staff time and probably a bunch of weekends that they won't admit to, they were able to do this and make it general fund neutral. So I just wanted to say thank you to them, and we'll see you soon as we come back to the process.
Yes, thank you all. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
We have no more discussion, then can I get a motion to adjourn? So the second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye. Still, I want to stay longer.